Okay. Hello students. Welcome to our coaching classes. Welcome to the part 2 of life processes. Chapter 6, Class 10 CBSE Science. Please watch part 1 before proceeding. If you haven't watched part 1, please watch it. Okay. Alright. Now, nutrition. One of the processes is what? Nutrition. The process by which organism takes in food, that is the source of energy. Food is nothing but what? Source of energy, and utilizes it for various biological activities is known as nutrition. Is known as what? Nutrition. Now, why nutrition is necessary, or what is the importance of nutrition? Every living organism needs energy and materials to maintain a state of order in its body. State of order in its body means what? The body should function properly. We have seen that your body is nothing but a factory. You can relate it to a factory. If factory has to function properly, it needs energy, it needs power supply, it needs raw materials, right? The waste products which are generated, those must be thrown out of the factory. Okay, those must be disposed properly, right? So similarly, every living organism needs energy and materials to maintain a state of order in its body. The energy obtained from food, it is utilized for performing various activities. The energy that we obtain from food, it is utilized for performing various activities. Even if you are having rest, still your brain is thinking, right? Now your heart is pumping blood. So even if an organism is at rest, this energy is required for performing various activities. For example, you have had food, right? Then you relax for a while, but your stomach is working. Okay, it's churning food, so energy is required, right? You're thinking about something, energy is required, right? You're breathing, right? The diaphragm is going up and down, right? Energy is required. The nutrients obtained from food are utilized for growth, development, repair, and synthesis of protein and other substances needed in the body. Now, along with food, that is major source of energy is carbohydrates, right? Now, along with this, we are also having proteins, vitamins, minerals, etc. All these things, right? So these nutrients which are obtained from food are utilized for growth and development, for repair, synthesis of proteins and other substances that are needed in the body, right? And it is universal for each and every living organism. Let it be unicellular organism like bacteria, prokaryotes, or amoeba, paramecium, or let it be plant or human being or any other organism, right? Okay. Now, how do living organisms or living things get their food? The general requirement for energy and material is common in all organisms, but it is fulfilled in different ways. What does this mean? The requirement of energy and material is common in all organisms. We have seen that ATP is what? Energy currency. Okay. So energy is required by each and every living organism. Each and every water is essential for life. In fact, we say that water is life, right? Then some minerals are required by each and every living organism. But the way it is fulfilled by each and every type of living organism is different in different ways. Now, some organisms use simple food material obtained from inorganic substances or inorganic sources in the form of carbon dioxide and water. These organisms also known as what? Autotrophs, include green plants and some bacteria. What I am saying? Some bacteria, not all bacteria. Some bacteria means what? One of the examples is what? Cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. So plants and cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, they are what? Autotrophic in nature. So they utilize inorganic sources in the form of carbon dioxide and water and synthesize energy-rich carbohydrate. So they are autotroph. They prepare their own food. Along with this, they also absorb some minerals. Right? Okay. Now other organisms, okay, especially animals and fungi, they utilize complex substances. These complex substances have to be broken down in simpler ones before they can be used for the upkeep and growth of the body, right? So these complex substances, they have to be broken down into simpler one. This is what process of digestion. You have studied it in the previous classes, I think class 7, right? Digestion. To achieve this, organisms use biocatalysts called as enzymes. Okay, so enzymes are nothing but biocatalysts. We will have one concept bite on this, biocatalysts or enzymes. Okay, let's not go into the details of those things right now. So these are nothing but what? Heterotrophic organisms. They include animal and fungi. They include what? Animals and fungi, right? So they break down these complex substances by the process of digestion and then they assimilate it. Now, these organisms, which ones? Heterotrophs or heterotrophic organisms, they are dependent directly or indirectly on the autotrophs, right? You must have studied this in food chain, etc. So for example, deer, herbivore. So it is directly dependent on autotrophs, right? Plants. So deer will eat plants, grass, etc. Then tiger, it is carnivore, right? So tiger gets its energy or food from primary consumer. Then these are what? Decomposers, fungi. So when, let it be plant or animal, when they are dead, or food which is dead and decaying, they can grow on it, right? Okay, so these are heterotrophic. Fungi, as we know, are also known as saprotrophs, right? Okay, now types of nutrition. What are the different types of nutrition? On the basis of how organisms obtain food, there are two types of nutrition. First one is autotrophic nutrition. Autotrophic organisms prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. You must be knowing this, right? Okay. Second one is heterotrophic nutrition. Heterotrophic organisms depend on autotrophic organisms or other heterotrophic organisms for food. So deer depends on plants, tiger, etc. They depend on deer, right? Okay. Autotrophs, plants and animal. Sorry, plants, algae, etc. Cyanobacteria. Heterotrophs are shown over here. Okay. All right. Now, let us try to understand autotrophic nutrition in plants. Now, autotrophs or autotrophic organisms, they use simple inorganic materials like carbon dioxide, water, and they convert it into complex high energy molecules, that is carbohydrates. Those are also known as what? Carbohydrates. One of the example is glucose. Okay. Glucose is very common source of energy for most of the organisms, living organisms on this planet, right? Okay. Now, the mode of nutrition in which organisms prepare their own food from inorganic raw materials like carbon dioxide and water is called as autotrophic nutrition. Is called as what? Autotrophic nutrition. Green plants and cyanobacteria prepare their own food by the process of photosynthesis. They prepare the process of photosynthesis. Now let us try to understand actually what happens in photosynthesis. Okay, you have studied this several times in your previous classes. Let us try to revisit it. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants prepare food. Food is what? Carbohydrates from inorganic raw materials like carbon dioxide and water, like carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight, in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, right? So this is nothing but photosynthesis. Now, what are the requirements for photosynthesis? These are the requirements. You need carbon dioxide, you need water, you need sunlight, and you need chlorophyll. Okay, all right. The site where photosynthesis occurs is known as chloroplast. It is cell organelle found in plant cells. Okay, they contain green colored pigment known as chlorophyll that traps sunlight for photosynthesis. So light energy is converted to chemical energy, right? Okay, so I also recommend you to see our concept video on difference between or comparison between plant cell and animal cells. Okay, all right. Now, equation for photosynthesis. This is very, very important. Okay, so you must write down and remember this equation. Okay, write down and remember this equation. 6CO2 plus 12H2O. In presence of chlorophyll and sunlight, you get C6H12O6, that is nothing but glucose, plus 6 molecules of oxygen plus 6 molecules of water, right? So this is nothing but process of photosynthesis. Equation for photosynthesis. You must remember this equation. Write it down several times and remember this. Okay, all right. Now, where does this occur? Now this is leaf, right? So if you take a cross section of leaf and look it under microscope, so you will see this is what? Upper epidermis, this is lower epidermis, this is mesophyll layer, and this is what? Palisade layer. If you look closely, there are these green dots. These are nothing but what? Chloroplasts, and they contain what? Chlorophyll pigment. They contain what? Chlorophyll pigment, right? So they absorb sunlight and trap it for further processing. Then from where does this CO2 enter into the plants, or how do plants take in CO2? So they take in CO2 or carbon dioxide from this part, this lower epidermis, and there are some pores in the lower epidermis, and these are guarded. These pores or holes are guarded by guard cells. Okay, and from here carbon dioxide enters into the leaves, and from the same pores oxygen, which is product of photosynthesis or byproduct of photosynthesis reaction, which is released in the atmosphere. Along with this, water vapor, as we have seen in case of transpiration in earlier classes, is also released via these pores. Now what these pores are called? Yes, these pores are known as stomata, right? Okay, now what actually happens during the process of photosynthesis? The following events occur during this process. Absorption of light energy by chlorophyll. This is the first step. In the second step, conversion of light energy to chemical energy and splitting of water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. This process is also known as photolysis. Okay, photo, light, lysis means breakdown. Photolysis of water. Then reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. Reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates occurs. Okay, all right. These are the events that occur during the process of photosynthesis. Right? Okay. So carbon dioxide reduction. You have hydrogen atoms attached to this. So that means it has reduced to the carbohydrate, that is glucose. Right? Okay. Now these steps need not take place one after the other immediately. Means one after the other immediately, right? For example, the desert plants, plants which are found in desert, okay, where there is scarcity of water, temperature is very high, take up carbon dioxide at night. They take up CO2 at night and prepare an intermediate which is acted upon by the energy absorbed by chlorophyll during the day. So desert plants, they absorb CO2 at night. They take up CO2 at night, and this CO2 is converted to an intermediate, and then this intermediate is utilized when during the daytime they will absorb light energy. They will convert this intermediate into the food or carbohydrates, right? Okay. Why is it so? Can you think? Okay. In the desert plants, the stomata are closed during the day to avoid loss of water by transpiration. So during the daytime, if you observe the stomata of the desert plants, these are closed to avoid loss of water by transpiration. Since stomata are closed, the pores are closed, plant cannot take up CO2 for the process of photosynthesis. Instead, what they do, they open it at the night, take in CO2 when temperature is less and water loss by transpiration is minimum, and during daytime they will close it. Whatever CO2 was taken up at the night time, that is converted into an intermediate, and then it is utilized for the process of photosynthesis during the daytime when sunlight will be available. Okay, all right. Now stomata and guard cells. Last year also we have seen this diagram. Since large amount of water can be lost through stomata, the plant closes these pores when it does not need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Okay, so plant can close it. The opening and closing of this pore is a function of guard cells. So these are the guard cells. Okay, they can open and close the pore or gate or hole through which carbon dioxide is taken in, oxygen is released, or water vapor is released, right? Now guard cells swell when water flows into them. When water flows inside the guard cells, they swell, causing the stomatal pore to open. The stomatal pore is open when water is flowing inside. Similarly, the pore closes when guard cell shrinks. When water leaves these cells, the pore will close. Okay, so it is dependent on amount of water inside the guard cells. Okay, all right. Now what happens to the excess of carbohydrates or glucose in the plants? What happens to the excess of carbohydrates or glucose in the plants? The carbohydrates which are not used immediately, so plant also needs some energy, right, to grow, to repair, right? But it is preparing its own food, right? So what is the end product of photosynthesis? Glucose. Now this glucose, that is carbohydrate, which is not used immediately, are stored in the form of starch. It is stored in the form of starch, which serves as the internal energy reserve to be used as and when required by the plant. So it doesn't remain like glucose as it is. So a polymer of glucose is formed, in simple words, and it is stored in the form of starch inside the plants. Okay, very good example of uh, plants containing high amount of starch is what? Are what? Potatoes, tapioca. So they store large amount of starch in that. Okay, then your sago plant, sago grains. Okay, all right. Then somewhat similar situation is seen in us, that means in human beings, where some of the energy derived from the food we eat is stored in our body in the form of glycogen. Now this is another polymer or another form of stored energy or stored food material in the form of glycogen. Now glycogen is stored in liver. Okay, whatever glucose you are taking, whatever carbohydrates you are eating, ultimately they are broken down to glucose. We have seen in class 7. Okay, digestion, and this excess of glucose is converted to glycogen. It is converted to glycogen as a reserve food material, right? So whatever excess energy derived from the food we eat is stored in our body in the form of glycogen. So whenever there is scarcity of glucose in our body, or whenever somebody is fasting, this glycogen is broken down again to glucose, and this glucose can be utilized as source of energy. In case of plants, starch. So starch and glycogen are they can relate to each other. You can relate them to each other. So starch is what in plants and glycogen in animals. Okay, all right. So this was end of part 2. So stay tuned for part 3. I hope this was useful for you. Keep studying. If you have any doubts, just write me in the comment box. I will try to answer as soon as possible. Thank you. Have a nice day.